Hi, this is Dr. Yates, and I am sending a screencast your way just to spend a little time with you talking about the 5E lesson plan model. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about each one of the components of the 5E, and I think that you'll find that it matches very closely with other lesson plan styles that you have been exposed to. You're going to start your lesson plan, of course, by just filling in your name as the teacher. Go ahead and pick your subject and your grade level and tell me your topic and your Florida standard. I want you to notice that anytime you do a lesson plan for me on your faith integration, I do want you to highlight it here in this box and let me kind of know ahead of time where you're going with your faith integration. But as it says right on your lesson plan template, I must see it in your lesson and it needs to be integrated. In other words, just sticking a Bible verse at the top of your lesson plan is not faith integration. So I really want you to use your resources that you have from your faith integration course. I want you to search and think and pray about how you can let your faith shine through in your lesson plan. You can go ahead and put some kind of a lesson essential question or an I can statement in this section. And then also contemplate some common misconceptions that you might run into in your lesson plan. Our boys and girls often have misunderstandings that they're bringing to our classroom. And they might be misunderstandings that you've read about. They might be misunderstandings that you remember having when you were their age. So just try to think of some misconceptions. Often our teacher's editions will warn us or let us know of some common misconceptions. So don't belabor this point, but I do want you to pause and give thought to it because it will help you enable your students to comprehend and understand better if you already perceive some of the problems that they're going to run into. Vocabulary. We don't want to front end our vocabulary. That means we don't want to stand up in front of the classroom and give a list of definitions and tell what they mean before we start our lesson. We do want to list our vocabulary and the definitions in this space provided on the lesson plan, but we want to integrate the teaching of vocabulary as we're doing activities, as we are questioning, as we are explaining throughout our lesson plan. So do list your vocabulary words and the definitions in this section, but let's not just push that out to the boys and girls at the beginning of the lesson. List any materials that you would need here. So that takes care of the front part of your lesson plan. And then if you look at the lesson plan that's provided in your syllabus, you'll see that the next section is the engage section. And in this section, you are going to tell how you're going to capture your students' interest. And the engage section might be just a quick little demonstration by the teacher. It might be something that you're allowing the students to participate in. But the key is that it should be engaging. In every section of the lesson plan, I'm going to ask you what kind of questions you would ask because I feel like you should ask questions throughout the lesson to be sure that your students are engaged. So in your engaged section, think of something, look in your teacher's edition, look on Pinterest. What kind of activity can you do to capture your students' interest and motivate them to be engaged in your lesson? And then go ahead and type out your questions ahead of time so that you are well prepared to engage your students in critical thinking. That's not going to just happen. So I want you to give careful thought to your questions in every section of the 5E lesson plan. Next, we're going to explore. And so this might be the section where you let the students get up and do an experiment or a demonstration. It's hands-on, minds-on activities. And here, I want you to be sure that you, again, are going around the room as the students are exploring and you are using your questioning strategy. Questioning is going to be so important as we teach our students to problem solve, as we teach them to have inquiring minds. And so go ahead and type out the questions that you're going to use to encourage exploration and to focus the students' attention on exploration and maybe even to redirect the students. If you are maybe teaching something where you have manipulatives that you can bring, something for the students to explore with and just get their thinking caps going, that's what you would do during the explore part of your lesson plan. Then you bring the students back together, usually in a whole group, and you are going to have the explain section of your lesson plan. And you'll notice that I marked that student explanation should precede explanations by the teacher. In other words, give your students a chance to offer explanations first. I often say that whoever is talking the most learns the most, and I got that out of an actual research study that was done where they were measuring learning achievement. And so if you're allowing your students to talk, even if they flounder a little bit, even if they're still working out their ideas, that's part of learning. So in this section, I want you to again explain your questions or techniques that you're going to use to help the students connect what they just did in the exploration section to now this concept that they're studying. And we can do this in every subject area. So you are guiding, you are facilitating as the students are taking turns explaining their discoveries or explaining even maybe more questions that they found. Again, in every section of the lesson plan, I expect you to list questions. So here, as the boys and girls are explaining and you are explaining as well, and maybe you're modeling something here, you are going to type out your higher order thinking questions that you're going to use to get those students involved in the explain section. And be sure that you ask your students to justify their explanations. That's a wonderful way to promote critical thinking in your classroom. After you have engaged your students and you've allowed them to explore and you've had some explaining time, you're going to start wrapping up your lesson, but you're going to elaborate on the topic. And the elaboration part doesn't just have to be for your young scientists and young mathematicians that are oh so bright. Elaboration is not just for the gifted child, but elaboration is just taking the lesson concept and thinking about maybe how you could use it in the real world. Maybe taking that lesson concept and thinking, how can I apply this to something in my life? So that's that elaboration section. And the best way to learn how to become good at your elaboration section is to look at your lesson plans. And there are 5E models for you to look at to study that elaboration section. So in your elaboration section, what vocabulary words are you going to be using? How are you going to connect the vocabulary words that you've taught in today's lesson to the students' observations and the students' discoveries? So elaboration is an excellent time for you to connect that vocabulary that you've taught and help students take it to the next level and help students apply it in the real world. So after the elaborate section, I have a specific section for you to tell me what kind of evaluation you're going to use. But I don't want your evaluation to only be described in this section. Maybe this is your summative evaluation. But if you look at your lesson plan format, all throughout the lesson plan on the right-hand side, I have given you a colored section there to include things that you are evaluating. As you go through your lesson, you should already be assessing your students. Looking at your students, you can tell by their facial expressions if they're grasping what you are presenting or not. You can look at students' explanations and decide if they're really catching on to the concept or not. And so evaluation shouldn't only take place at the end of your lesson. It should be spread throughout the entire 5E lesson plan. Now, as you are developing your lesson plan, you have some resources on MyFire. And whether you are doing this in your science class or your math class, you can open up the Florida Standards. So here I have the Florida Science Standards. And there is a digital link to this on our course in MyFire. And so you would have a benchmark and you would have a description of that benchmark and a grade level. And it would tell you which section of science or mathematics it's coming from. But over here on the right-hand side is a direct link to CPALMS. And if you haven't used CPALMS, boy, should you investigate it. Because when you go to CPALMS, you're going to find a wealth of resources. So again, the Florida standards for math and science are included in our course in MyFire, and you can pull it up. You can pull your standard right off of this document, but you can also visit CPALMs. And as you focus on your lesson, I want you to be thinking about, what do the students need to learn? That's kind of like your objective, your lesson essential question that you're using. And then that revolves around, and you think about, well, what activities am I providing to enhance that learning or to make sure that it takes place? And then if I know what the students need to know, and I'm planning activities so that they can learn that, I also need to be thinking about, how will learning be assessed? And so I want you to be thinking about all of these things as you develop your lesson plan. Some of the neat activities that you can find are going to be on CPALMs. And so when you are on your standards and you come over here to the direct link to CPALMs and you click it, you'll be taken to CPALMs. And again, you'll have your standard, and this particular standard is for science, talking about the state of matter. And if you will look over to this side, you can export the lesson plan. So if it's something that you're wanting to export and copy and paste. But there are other resources listed over here on the right hand side. So I'm going to enlarge that section on my next slide. For this particular standard on the states of matter, there are 8 different lesson plans. There are 2 videos or some type of animations. You might want to use one of those. There are some worksheets. There are virtual manipulatives. There's some teaching ideas and games and slideshows and other resources available to you. So when you're creating your lesson plan, feel free to explore CPALMs. It's got your standard and it has all of these wonderful resources for you to pull from. Now, I hope you have a better understanding of the 5E lesson plan. We will be touching on it, of course, in our classes, but I hope that you are understanding that as you engage your students and then you give the opportunity for your students to explore. And then I want you to get your students talking, and I want you conversing and building that learning community in your explain section. Then you're going to elaborate on your topic, and you're going to make those real world connections, and you're going to allow the students to think about how they can elaborate on the topic of the day. And as you are making your assessments or your evaluations, I hope that you're feeling more confident. And as you create your lesson plan, remember, you can work with a buddy, you can work with a small group. And so I want you to think about this round table idea of sharing ideas. And maybe only 2 teachers are creating the lesson plan to use together, but you can certainly talk to other teachers at your table to glean ideas. So I hope this has been helpful on the 5E lesson plan components. Thanks for listening.